I am so glad we refound each other and we're here today. And I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about. So, welcome to the Power Reclamation Podcast.
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie, for inviting me. And like you, I'm really excited about this hot theme that we are talking about today.
Yeah, just for listeners, I want to just name that we just spoke for a few minutes before we went live. And I love what you said about we don't know where this conversation is going to go, listeners, but we know the heart of it. And really, I think you were talking about power abuse in spirituality. And I think power abuse in leadership in general is really the heart of where we're going to go today. And I thought what we could do is just open up with what actually threaded our lives back together to be in contact again was a post you had on Facebook that I responded to. And it was, maybe you want to take it away, but it was really poignant for me about the kind of trauma that can happen in these spiritual circles. So do you want to start there and just share for the listeners what transpired and what you were writing about?
Well, I just innocently posted a Facebook message, and I had quite an explosion of opinions that came after. And the post was really about that I have a client that I've been working with, and she came to me from a spiritual leader, a very, very famous person. And this sweet woman was a mother and had a little one of a 4-year-old, and she couldn't go shopping anymore because she constantly had panic attacks. She couldn't drive a car anymore because she froze up in the car at the steering wheel. I mean, you know what it's like. Anybody who knows, like when you freeze up in a panic, it's extremely dangerous if you drive a car. So she couldn't drive anymore. She couldn't go out because she would get panic attacks in social settings. And she told me before she came to that spiritual leader, so-called healer, teacher, she had anxiety, but it wasn't to that extent, and she could kind of manage it. But during the time, those years she was with him, she learned all these transcendence practices, which meant go out of your body. And she also learned so-called new beliefs. So she placed them on top of the wound, I would say, the trauma, and created an even bigger mantle to cover up the trauma that was underneath. And what happened during those years, she got worse and worse and worse. Then she went to the teacher and said, I'm just getting worse. And he said, well, you're not doing it right. You must be doing something wrong. Of course, which translated into I'm wrong, which means it evoked tremendous shame. She couldn't talk to anybody about it. So she was knotted up.
Makes me want to growl. Keep going.
It made me growl.
Yeah, exactly. I can feel it in my body right now.
I got furious when I heard this. And I'm like, this is really bad. Because she's a mother. She needs to also take care of her kid. And I mean, for herself, the suffering was increasing and increasing. This woman was on a spiritual path, really dedicated, trying to do everything right, trying to heal, doing everything. She was like doing his practices, like, I don't know for how many hours, The result was more suffering, the shame that came on top of it. And when she tried to talk to others about it, what happened was she was shamed even more.
In the community?
And so I work in community, in their community.
Okay.
Yeah, so the message always, what's wrong with you? Something is wrong with you, that it's not working. We adore our teacher. He's the ultimate guru, basically. Whatever he says is right and mustn't be questioned. So the first time I talked
right there, with her, like the second arrow, just to jump in. It's like the first arrow is you're doing it wrong. And the second is then having the community invalidate her experience. Okay, so keep going.
Also.
Mm-hmm.
And the teacher too. So that's three arrows that flew into her already suffering heart. And so we worked. I said to her, can you just, if I take you on, I need to ask you to stop doing his practices for a while. Because I couldn't ask her to just throw the whole thing into the garbage can because... However, when I worked with her trauma, I said, let everything go you learned. And it was literally the opposite way we had to go. Like really work with the trauma, but also that I taught her spiritual practices that brought more kindness and a way of befriending her own humanity and a skill. How do you meet fear? How do you meet the deeper pains? And she had a hand, and I tell you, within 1 year, it got better and better. But after that period of a year, she has no more anxiety, zero. She goes out, she goes playing with her kid, she goes shopping, she goes car driving, she stands up to people, wow. She's awake to her true essence, which she really wasn't, and she feels embodied, and she is really happy and grounded on this planet Earth.
Remarkable.
So she really, and she tells people now about this other, this more embodied spiritual path. Mm-hmm. But it's like it was dungeon work partially, it was working and resourcing her, about that.
Yeah.
But the story about once she stood up to him, I knew we had completed this part
so that was
of
part
the
of
journey.
The story, as she went back to the teacher and took a stand for something around her own spiritual sovereignty.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow, what a journey that in a year.
He didn't take it.
Yeah, that's not a long time.
He didn't take it well, but she didn't. No, but she didn't care anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
took it well or not.
The gift, right? It's like there's not a sense of it doesn't matter anymore because it's the clarity of what she needed is inside of her now, and it's not out there with him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
she has the power.
Exactly, she has the power to trust her instincts. No, this is great. I think what a powerful example, and there's a couple of different things that are coming up for me. Then I want to ask you 4 more questions. It feels like, on the one hand, depending on our cosmology, there's a way in which that teacher played the perfect role. And it's so painful to have trauma reinforced like that. So like at a soul level, maybe that's true, but at a very grounded human level, for us to be embodying, we need to be able to understand when practices are putting us on this trajectory. Maybe you could speak more about this transcendence, but this place of leave the pain, leave the experience, go out there and basically abandon your body, which is sort of counter to the welcoming and the compassion that really does create the integration. So maybe you could speak a little bit about, as a teacher, what it's like for you in the way that you bring in the embodied practices and how you help people understand the difference between that and transcending.
Yeah, I speak actually directly about it in my retreats to say, okay, the transcendence practices have a place. It's like, this is also the masculine way. But they're usually packaged as this is the way. And I always tell people, and especially for women, it's crucial to know about transcendence practices. They take you out of your body, and you as woman will be more disconnected than ever if you leave out your humanity. Mm-hmm. So the spiritual practices that I bring in, there are many, of course, but they all have one quality that you already spoke. It's the compassion practices, the befriending practices. Yes. And the landing more gently in the body, because for many, because I work also as a, trauma teacher, it's like for many, it's scary to come into the body, because in the body sits the abuse. So why would you use a spiritual practice that brings you right to the body? Mm-hmm. So what I include is also the environment, what's the goodness that's here, not far away, but right here, like you can feel it between us right now. Or your flowers on the chimney there, on your stove. It's like noticing what feels safe in our space right now. Yeah. That is already such a simple beginning, because if we don't weave those two together, spirituality and humanity, we basically have a sinking ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
So I bring that in always in my teachings and in various ways, but it's like, I notice also when somebody is like really having all these fantastic awakening experiences, which is great. And at the same time, how are you living as a human being on this planet Earth with your kid or with your partner in your life, at your work? How do you walk it? Mm-hmm. So that piece. And then there's others, they're so identified with their personality that they actually need some practices where they can open to something that's far greater than, their normal day-to-day life.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate how important this piece is around finding the right practices for each person. And I want to go back to this theme around abuse of power, because it sounds like, let's stay with this example you just shared. It sounds like you got some kickback, and you got some kickback for what happened? What did you write that made people respond with some kinds of aggression?
Well, I dare to speak the name of the guy, right. The teacher.
That's right. I do recall that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I thought, it might help some. And it did. Some people were like, oh, yeah, that really makes sense. I had that experience and I couldn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And then there were others who fiercely attacked because it's like their glorified teacher. Right. And I noticed also, and, I work with a lot of women, but I noticed how many women were actually defending the authority and male white, of course. Mm-hmm. I'm generalizing here, but there is a tendency, it's, it might be hard to admit for women, but there's a tendency that as women, we have been so suppressed, oppressed, and the authority was always male, and we just unquestioned bow to the teacher, especially the male teacher. And unquestioned, I find this very dangerous, to not question. I always tell my people, don't follow me, check me out. And then, then you see if it's right for you. Mm-hmm. But there is a power abuse that starts happening, that the two play that together. Exactly. It's the teacher as well.
Yes.
And the people that don't question things. Because no leader, no teacher in the spiritual scene or in any scene is ever perfect. Mm-hmm. And if that is not, we're all humans, like me too. So I don't pretend I'm this enlightened whatever. And I do have, tons of experience and wisdom, etc. But I'm happy to be human and let that be seen. Yeah. So I find this, this is the piece, the power piece. It's very tempting to go and give power over. Mm-hmm. And particularly in the spiritual scene. Mm-hmm. It's the most dangerous place for that. There's no other area that's so dangerous for that, because your soul gets involved, your heart gets involved, your emotions. Even a business leader, you can still maybe question more. It might be just more difficult, but in the spiritual scene, it's the ultimate authority, so-called.
Right. And I think, staying on this theme of there is collective conditioning that women in particular have been indoctrinated with. It's sort of the hierarchy still that lives in the world. If we look at the overarching energy of the patriarchy, I know that's a loaded word for many people, but really when masculine energy is so imbalanced that there's a form of domination to maintain control, there's something here that I'd love to, like, what's the message for women? Like, what's the shadow that we could tease out further here for women to understand the power that we have to transform our relationship to our inner authority and external authority?
I think what you spoke about with the collective, we have to do this not just inside, but with the collective, with other women. It's too difficult otherwise. Because the collective has a very strong spell. It's mesmerizing, the spell of stay silent. Something's wrong with you. Mustn't question authority, because we did get killed for it.
Exactly.
Not this century, but all other centuries, pretty much.
That's right.
So there is a real sense of danger, of life threat, to even open your mouth alone. And I think your question is beautiful, because what we could say, for me, what I would say to this is like to start actually talking with another person, a woman, about, this situation that someone might be in, or to start asking, okay, so how, this works for me with this teacher, and this I don't really feel so drawn to. That it becomes more normalized of not putting a person, especially the masculine, onto the pedestal and saying, I worship you for the rest of my life.
Right. Yeah, I feel like what you're naming is like our personal responsibility to pierce the savior projection that we place upon other people, whatever gender, but particularly women have placed that upon men, given so much of history. And it is time for us to start really challenging and noticing when we do that, when we believe that someone is going to be a savior for something that we think we need. And it's often at a survival level. But I feel like that's a one big thread I'm just wanting to pull out that you named, of just how do we become more aware? And then the secondary piece I feel like you're saying, and maybe you want to add more to this, is how do we begin to build circles and communication with others, men and women, about this phenomenon, so that we have our eyes open and we're helping each other see where we're giving our inner authority away because of this blindness.
Yeah. I think that speaking about it is already helpful. And it's not about tearing teachers down,
right.
It's not about tearing leaders down. It's more like seeing, okay, so if there is abuse, and the abuse often is unfortunately manipulative, it's like you don't see it up front directly. That's the tricky part here. Unless, for example, a teacher sexually abuses his students. Okay, that's now finally coming to the light. And now finally people speaking about it.
But there's still
it wasn't possible to speak about this. Oh yeah.
Right.
Well,
I mean, I
go.
know
It's always Go ahead.
Well, I just know that there's many, many big yoga teachers, as most people know, who have done sort of egregious sexual assault with their students, and there has been a lot of speaking out about it, which often the victim gets sort of scapegoated and made wrong. Like, what is that structure and mindset collectively that causes that to repeat itself? It seems so slippery still.
Well, this is what you're speaking to, the victimizing and the scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
This is so common that the one who's been harmed then gets scapegoated on top of it.
Exactly.
It's like a shadow that nobody wants to see. And scapegoat is a classic. It comes from the Jewish tradition. It's like a goat who carries the sins. They do this once a year. They put the sins onto the goat and then throw the goat over the cliff. It's the, and then the Christianity took it too. Well, we crucified Jesus on the cross. He took our sins onto him and saved us. We kill him. And that level of insanity is literally in our psyche, and it's collective because you see it in every area, and you do see it in the religions too. Mm-hmm. The crucifixion, like we don't know what to do with our sins, our anger, our fury, our lust, our distortions. We put it on, we have to find somebody, and collectively we put it on this group. Let's say, for example, the Jewish people, the Germans. I come from Germany, so this is what the Germans did. And then we kill them in order to kill what? Our garbage.
Yeah.
And so this happens with children in homes. There's always the abused kid as the scapegoat. Mm-hmm. Until we face our own crap, our own shadow, our own unresolved material, we will always project, always. And it will be always somebody that we're going to hang.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems part of the larger play. Yeah.
And we don't want to see people in pain. Yeah, this is also our Western culture. And particular New Age circles, we don't want to see people in pain, that vulnerability of a human being who got raped from the teacher that I worship. Right. That would shatter everything inside. That would shatter the projection of like, this person is blameless, therefore the teacher is blameless, and therefore the victim is, well, it's your own fault. You just didn't get the teachings right. This was just an initiation, honey. Don't worry. This wasn't abuse. I've heard those things. Mm-hmm. And I get the people who come to me tell me stories you would not believe, how they're being scapegoated.
Yeah. And also going back to the earlier theme of being their direct experience is being diminished and really relegated back into the shadow, like not even acknowledged as real. And so I wonder if before we go on, if it would be helpful for us to share a little bit about like, what does this actually look like? Because we have clients, we know stories. I've had a direct experience with a spiritual teacher years and years ago. What does this look like when this power is being abused? Like, what is the direct experience for certain people? Or maybe there's another way in, but I feel like I kind of want to see the field so people can even relate to what it is that we're saying in a direct way. So we have this example of what you shared with the Facebook person where they were going to help, they were going to this teacher to get support around their anxiety, and then as things weren't working, the teacher told them they were doing it wrong and shaming them. And so What are other forms that you are aware of, that you've seen or heard of?
Well, one of the recent one, just to give people even more of a taste, it was actually a female teacher, who told okay, so this is almost funny but it's also bad. She's told her student that the mate that she is with isn't the right mate because she has another woman chosen for him that she thinks, that she knows fits much better to him.
Oh.
Her partner, they were in love, the two. Okay? They were completely in love and they had found each other and the whole story. And she was happy with him and he was happy with her. But they both worshiped the teacher to the point where it's like they didn't use their own common sense anymore.
Yeah.
But what happened was also why it was so tricky, because this woman had a lot of Shakti power. So she uses that, I know she does, for the teacher. She manipulates with that. She comes with enormous force. And she said to the young guy, she said, look, I have chosen for you a woman that is befitting your advanced state. You do not fit with the other one who's way less advanced. And I know that this is in your soul. You must be with this other woman. Mm-hmm. That guy, young, inexperienced, wants to please mama, wants to please the teacher, splits up and goes to the other woman. Wow. And that was the end of that. When the female student confronted her in front of the group, which I thought was very brave, the teacher just laughed at her and said she has to go to the back corner of the room and ponder where she's coming from and sit with her own pain of the separation. And she was doing it to help her to come to awaken to her own true nature. So she was basically saying, I'm hurting you, so you will wake up from your stuff. You must let go of your attachments, honey, she said. So she twisted it.
Oh, this is so painful to hear.
You can sense this, yeah? This twistedness. The student said to me, I was so confused. I knew is this wrong, but I couldn't put words to it. And I was so confused. Yeah. Because she told me these words, and some of the words, of course, were truth. I am more of an attached person, so she tapped right into her insecurities and played them.
That is such misabuse of authority, of power. It's really this is how it can play out in a spiritual realm. It seems like there's a theme, and I know for myself, when I was feeling complete with this spiritual community I was with, it was 20 years ago, and I felt like my spirit needed something different. I went to the teacher and I told him that I would be moving to California and studying with someone else and going back to school. And the veins in his neck, as he started to yell at me about like, you don't need another master's degree, you don't, blah, it's just like the amount of his own wounding came through, like his own attachment material got hit. And because it hadn't been integrated enough, he projected it all over me. And fortunately, I don't even know what grace I had enough inner authority to realize this is crazy. This is not okay. Like he's teaching about owning your inner authority, and yet he's telling me that my choices are wrong. So I feel like that's a point we need to be talking about this with one another if we're ever in a situation where, because it does get confusing, the way you just described with this client of yours, how like some of it was true. And so the twisting and how do we begin as a collective to name and own? And how do we help leaders who are running their power in a distorted way to take ownership? I know it's a big question. I'm not saying we should answer that now, but what's coming up for you as we map some of these out and put them on the table? Anything else?
Well, what's coming up for me is like, we're doing it. We're already bringing it to light as we're talking here with this beautiful podcast you have. Right. So it's already stirring in probably anybody who's listening. Mm-hmm. And then the other way is also the word validate someone's experience. Yeah. That if any of the listeners know someone, just validate the experience of that person who feels abused. Now, not everybody is being abused who says they're being abused, of course, but start validating is a very good beginning. And for you had the inner resources that you could go on. I don't think it's so much about needing to know your inner authority, because that takes time. Mm-hmm. But having some resources, for example, like, okay, this is confusing. I feel lost at sea here. Let me reach out to somebody and share this experience that I'm having. That's one way. And it can be also to a professional. But it also could be, if we create more spiritual community, to be able to share that in a Sangha, like in my Sangha, people share these things because I think it's absolutely essential to have that ground. Of course, as a teacher, I'm in the teacher's boat. I know there's also a lot of projections, come, and some of it is just like, okay, that's off the charts. I don't engage with that. But it's like, there's also things that people just, to have a community and to have an openness. Like if a teacher, for example, doesn't take feedback, that's a warning sign.
Definitely,
yeah? Yes. If your teacher could have just said to you, okay, I hear you, I don't agree with it, but I hear you, that's where you want to do, then if that's where your inner guides you to do that, even if I don't agree, that's like, but he took it personal, and what you said was important. A teacher must do the inner work. I had to do this, and I continue to do this, of facing my stuff, because otherwise it does play out. So there's an enormous responsibility in the teacher position. Yeah.
There really is.
Way more than in any other field. Mm-hmm. To have that ethical ground, the right boundaries, the way, how do you support somebody instead of like, dominating a person? How do you sit in your authority and guide and teach in a way that's empowering, but also truthful, Mm-hmm. And so I think anybody even in a coaching position I believe, has to take some ethical training. How do I deal with power?
Yes.
In a power position.
Yeah, and what are my go-tos?
ACS.
Go ahead.
Yes. You do need feedback. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You do need feedback also from other professionals, mentors. It's absolutely essential, because as a teacher, you don't see your blind spots. Like nobody sees their blind spots really clearly. Mm-mm. So it's
not until it gets kind of messy. Often.
It usually gets messy. And then you're like, I wonder. Mm-hmm. And I think also at this point, what you asked the question is like, for example, ASCI is an organization that I belong to. It's called Association for Spiritual Teachers of Integrity. They are very, very dedicated towards bringing a much more ethical spiritual teacher training, but also like guidelines and to the forefront. And students can also see, what do I need to learn? Like, how do I check out if my teacher has integrity? What can I use, to tell? Because some of the teachings, the wisdom teachings, is crazy wisdom, and they can get under your skin. So, but there's a clear line. For example, you do never have sex with a student unless you have said clearly, you're not my student anymore. These are basics in order to protect the integrity of a human who's given their heart and opened themselves really deeply to you. Right. That's a deep, deep honor and responsibility.
And there's an inherent power dynamic that needs to be addressed, because there's been someone in authority and someone as a follower. Like, that's sort of the paradigm. And so those have to be acknowledged. Yeah. So if someone is struggling with a teacher, they can contact this association and say, like, my teacher, I'm having this experience. And then is there some kind of action that's taken?
It's good. And that's where the association is still holding back. Okay. But they have fired a couple of people out of there. They can, also the students, they can look at the site, which teachers actually are on that site that have agreed to adhere to those ethical guidelines.
Okay.
It's like, even when I was a Dharma teacher in Buddhism, we had very clear ethical guidelines, and we trained for a long time to make sure we're not abusing our power. And there's a clear structure, Spirit Rock, as you remember, in California, with Jack Cornfield. There's a clear structure. Mm-hmm. And the council calls on you if you do actually step over that, And so there has to be, more in place. But for now, I would say that just having this conversation here, it's already bringing it out to the forefront. And this is what needs to happen. We need to talk about those things. Otherwise, for example, John of God raped 400 women. I mean, and this is not, we can't allow this to just, under the disguise of spirituality, a person can really have tremendous healing gifts or tremendous Shakti, and at the same time be, excuse my French, fucked up as a human being.
Totally. Unintegrated. Trauma has been unintegrated. And so they're behaving in ways they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Ultimately, I would say any teacher needs to go also into trauma therapy.
Yeah, I would say the same.
Sorry.
I would say the same, because I think that's where a lot of many people who seek spiritual path are really wanting to integrate and come all the way home. And some of the reasons that we're not integrated is because of unresolved trauma. And if a teacher doesn't know how to work with that, they can actually reinforce it. Like the first example you shared with the post you put on Facebook. It's such a delicate thing to understand where our understanding and our gifts are in terms of helping people slow down and start to heal the trauma, and when a teacher needs to recommend that someone get that support. But I agree. I think, for all humans, I'm going to be honest, if we're going to embody, there's a level of understanding how we've been traumatized and how to integrate that, because it's not just personal, it's ancestral trauma that we have in our systems, and it's the collective. So, go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
And no, we're both on fire right now. I can feel that. There's passion, and there's like, there's also this piece about that if a teacher is not skilled in trauma work, they shouldn't, and that includes coaches or anybody who guides people. If you're not skilled and trained in that, refer your student client out to somebody who is.
Yeah.
Because that's another power abuse that I see in the New Age scene. There's like, healers, or they train a little bit and then they guide people with some spiritual things. And then I say, well, I do, and that's just your wound, and we just change your beliefs. That is not okay, because unless you trained, don't touch it. Send out. There are people who are in the field who are really good with that. Refer out. It's not about like a spiritual leader or teacher or coach needs to do all things.
Exactly.
Now it's like, but we have to recognize, where's the line? What am I trained to do? And what is not for me to go to? And not every wound that comes up is trauma, but a lot of it is. And lately the buzzword is going around: trauma this, trauma that.
That's true.
But I think there's also the need to discriminate and say, okay, yes, this is an area I'm not trained, so I send the person somewhere else. Simple. It's very simple.
Yeah.
And because I know one thing, and I think that's really important for people to know, is awakening, the spiritual emergence, always goes hand in hand with the trauma that arises from your own past, as we know, from the ancestors, as you said, from the collective. It never ends, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely.
It always has to work hand in hand. That's what I feel, and that's kind of what I work with people, because I feel like it has to go with the human and the spiritual integration. Otherwise, we're just further disassociating and splitting off into greater separation.
Agreed. I know. I think that is that is such a good pointer. Is if we're truly going to embody individually and collectively, there is such an impetus for us to befriend the exiled parts of ourselves, so that we have an ability to compassionately be with those parts of self in order to be with them and other people. And I think you were talking before about in spiritual community, if somebody has been, let's say, victimized in some way, and they go to a Sangha member and they tell them, and the Sangha member can't have their view of reality about the teacher rocked it all, then they're going to align with the teacher and disempower. And like, that's another way that we throw arrows at each other. And it's all innocent. That's the hard thing about conditioning and trauma. Until we're aware, we don't know what we're doing. So I really hear your message. Go ahead.
I wouldn't even call it innocence, because true innocence is willing to see the beauty in the shit. And but it's naivety, I would call it more. That's ignorance great. And naivety.
Good distinction.
Yeah, it's like that. I cannot imagine, that's like one woman said, I cannot imagine that the holy, that what is sacred, the spiritual, that there would be abuse. This doesn't go together. And I said, yeah, I come. Because it rocks your deepest core in there.
Yeah.
It goes deep. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's like there is something. One of my teachers once said, it is an enormous responsibility to be a teacher. She said, the greatest karma is incurred by people who are in power, spiritual power, who abuse it. Yeah. Their karma will last for lifetimes to come, because of you do not sit in the seat unless you really work with power abuse and misuse.
Yeah.
And have your stuff together around that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for those who are harmed, I notice also there's a lot of shame to speak out.
Yeah.
Like, I must be silent about this.
Yeah, and
I think that's what we're piercing the veil.
I was just going to name, that feels like the theme
Go
to
ahead.
come back to. You're right, because as we come into like the heart of this, it feels like there's a level of wounding and separation and pain that happens when we can't trust ourselves. And I know myself, I've had a significant amount of trauma early in my life. And so I have had to really work with my own sense of not trusting myself because, one, like you said earlier, I couldn't trust my body because it had all this information that I didn't even really know it had until some of the memories started coming up. But also I couldn't really trust my instincts because it was like I was trained to look outside. I was trained to look outside for clarity and outside for guidance. That was how I was conditioned in my family. Not like, what do you think, honey? What are you feeling in your body? What is your body telling you? Like that wasn't the vernacular. So I feel like there's something so important about how we help one another learn to trust our direct experience, even if it's conditioning and trauma. Trust it. So I wonder if you can speak more of how you do that in the community, or any advice you have for people that are really wanting to come home more deeply and learn how to have their voice and learn how to trust themselves.
Such a good question. And I would say I rarely use the word trust.
Okay.
Because it's a hard one for most people.
Yeah.
Like when you grow up as a child, you depend on the feedback of parents. You not just the feedback, you depend. It like your parents have to mirror you. It's part of a natural childhood development, really. It's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
However, most parents don't mirror back. You know, you have such a good instinct for eating this good food. Yeah, it's like you don't get it mirrored back so much, you know, that it brings you more and more to you. That's the dance in the conditioning in our world. We get pulled out. We get, you know, it's from childhood on. First it's normal, and then it becomes detrimental. And especially when you had abuse, you don't trust yourself at all.
Right.
Because how can you, you know? But the thing that you're pointing towards is, it is really hard to go to this journey, trusting your own body, your own senses again, when you have been abused. So it's usually much better to get a bit more in the relational field, to get a mirror back of saying, okay, I actually hear that you feeling really upset. Simple mirror, yeah. A validation. I can hear also why you're upset about this. Another validation, right there. So that we as a community, and I do this in my sanghas, for example, like in the relational work, we do, you know, relating work, also more awake relating, of saying, oh yeah, I can feel you're really passionate right now. And the person, yeah, that's right. I didn't notice what I'm feeling. But when you say that, I can feel that. Yeah, it's like pointing back to, I can sense what's going on. Maybe I'm not correct, but I can sense it. And it awakens that just gets the sense, there's others who can sense me in this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful then, because that grows your own self-trust. So when it's been broken, it's very difficult to do this alone. That I would say.
Yes.
And or you have a teacher, or you have a therapist who supports you and brings it back to you, and then slowly there is the resource that grows, you know?
Yeah. I do think that that's a significant piece, is the relational, and having, I know for myself, just some of my closest friends, we know each other's snags. And so if we see one another kind of moving away from trusting ourselves, or there's a narrative that we go into to justify or something, we can actually start to inquire with each other. Like, is this that place? And it's just like being able to have it be seen in a safe way. And so I think that's really what my takeaway, and hopefully listeners really hear, is like, this isn't a journey to do alone, but it is about finding the kind of support where there isn't going to be an agenda of how you should or shouldn't be, or even pathologizing the trauma or the conditioning or anything, but actually just meeting you so that the wisdom of your own being can start to help the healing and the integration happen. So anything else you want to add as we start to close on that?
I think it's beautiful, because this is the piece of like the need to be truly seen and met and heard. And that is actually what lights the way back home to your own true nature, that's just longing to come forth in this body and this life and to shine the way. And I feel as a teacher, that's my responsibility to bring that, to guide that back, not just to deliver concepts, but to really do it in action. Like, I see, here you are, this beautiful being that's sitting here with me, you and Anne-Marie, so caring about people and so dedicated.
Yeah, that feels good. It's like being seen. This is it. Yeah.
I might as well, instead of just talking about it, I might as well just throw an experience in,
Right. Yeah, and the warming that happens like in my body right now, just being known and seen, and how that really is the way through. And I feel like there's a way that if we can create a world with one another where the intention really is to drop our agendas and simply be with one another, to actually hear what's really going on, I think there's an acceleration of what's possible in our integration, both with the person who's receiving the being seen, and also like the person who's doing the seeing. I think there's parts of myself when I sit with clients and I'm just in the space of just receiving everything and getting curious about everything with them. I also welcome parts of myself back home. There's like, it's not a one-way street. And so creating these environments where there's enough safety to actually tell the truth about our experience and have someone not make us wrong or get more curious about it, that seems like the way. So
yeah, it's like sitting. I always see myself sitting as at a table with all the beings coming, and each one gets a place at the table. There's soup for everyone, and there's a feast, and then everybody gets to have their say. And there's also a light that I hold for the truth, so that it's not getting all over the place and there's no one left out, but there's also no one who gets to take over. Right. So every part is welcomed, and at the same time, there's a way how to be, the landlady or the landlord in your own house or with others in this world. And I believe that when we walk like that, we are creating a world that everyone has a place and a home to be.
Yes, beautiful. So in closing, I wonder if you want to share more about what you do, so that if people want to learn more about you, I'll have everything in the show notes, but do you want to speak to what the heart of your work is in case people want to know more about you and at that level?
Sometimes I wonder what the heart of my work is, but
I get it.
And I realize it's just the heart.
Yes, same.
I'm always like, but it's also, for me, it's like spiritual embodiment is the main piece. And I do work with both women and men and all genders, but I have a lot of women that I work with. I teach spiritual retreats, and I also teach professional trainings really for healers and therapists. And I teach also professional training that I'm really excited about. That's because I got so upset about these issues that we just talked about, that I felt like it's time that I actually offer a spiritual teacher leader training that is ethical and has substance.
Beautiful.
After teaching for 30 years, I felt like my hairs went up. I kept being called, and I was like, and now it's like, yes, this wants to happen, and I'm really excited about it. Actually, I'm really.
I can see
and
that.
It will be. This one will be only for women.
Okay.
Because it's like there's a different way for women. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if people
You
want to
wanted
learn
to ask
more,
something.
well, in terms of people who are spiritual leaders or teachers that want to learn more about, women specifically want to learn more about this program, it's on your website, or will it be on your website soon?
You go to my website.
Okay.
Yeah, my website, it's all on there. And the Transforming Lives training is particularly for those who work with trauma and spirituality and learn the skills for that. So it combines depth psychology and non-dual embodied spirituality. So it's that combination edge. Yeah. And I'm excited about that too, because I feel like that's right on that edge we talked about, what's so needed. So people can find that also on my website. That is coming up in October. And then there's lots of retreats and online courses and things like that.
Yeah, so, you have a wellspring. Yeah. And you also do one-on-one work?
Yeah, but less. I only now work with people who are really guiding others. Okay. So great. That is... Yeah, because I feel I have such a long wait list, and I feel I want to more focus on those who guide others and who have experience, and then really teach the trainings and then the group retreats and programs that anybody can join in.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, Nicola, it's so wonderful to be with you and to feel into the power of the work you're bringing into the world. And I'm thrilled. I'm so happy you're creating a program that's going to be talking about power and as leaders and teachers, like where are those pockets where abuse comes in? What does that look like? And so I will be referring people to you that I know are definitely leaders who are wanting to be more, integrating their own shadow. So thank you for being here today. Is there any last thing you feel like, there may not be, that you would want people to hear about this topic today that maybe we haven't touched on around the abuse of power in teachers?
I think I just want to thank you right now for making this possible and bringing and feeling the importance of that. I just appreciate you for providing that space and inviting me into it too. So, and I just feel we talked in a way that was so non-judgmental, but at the same time also fierce. And I call it fierce love. That we need in this world. We need fierce love. We don't need more chewing gum love. We really need to see. I have such a funny bone. Sorry, when you get me going. It's like pudding love, It's like, it's all sweet and saucy. And that's nice. And we need this fierce love now that dares to look into the dark, pierces through without judgment and finds the true path that really brings us all home. So
beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I feel my last closing thought is just the beauty of the flow of life, that I happened to come upon that post you put on Facebook, and that it opened this piece where I saw you, I felt your passion and care, and I have such a strong devotion to is really, like you said, bringing light to the places where power is misused. Maybe it's naively and ignorantly. Maybe it's something else. I love that reframe. But the fact that it exists, if we don't have accountability together as a collective that this exists, and how we reinforce it and how we play into it, as in any role we play, I just don't see how we can keep evolving without that, without deep dive. So thank you.
We can't. We just pile more. We pile more suffering to pain. And actually, this conversation is about relieving suffering in this world.
It is.
That's what we that's what we stand for. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yes. Until we play again, thank you again for being here today.